everybody. I'm Deborah Roberts, and welcome to 2020, The After Show, where, as always, we take you not only inside our most recent 2020 episode, but we take you behind the scenes, pull back the curtain, so you can learn a little bit more about how we actually worked on this report. And today, we are talking about the mysterious case of the McStays family. If you saw our episode this past week, you saw this story. It's about a California husband and wife and their two sons who seemed to just vanish into thin air. It was a mystery for a few years until they were finally found, sadly, murdered. Our 2020 team, led by Matt Gutman, explored this case in What Happened to the McStays. It's now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu, and our ABC chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, is here with me now to talk more about it. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Deborah.
Hey, so listen, before we get into this story, I think our viewers and certainly our listeners know that you are, you're like the Energizer Bunny. Give our listeners a sense of what that's like for you all over the map, and sometimes you get these calls on a weekend.
Often. I mean, I've worked many weekends recently. But the good thing about this story that we're talking about, the McStays family disappearance and murder, was that it essentially had happened almost in my backyard. They bought the house and they were painting and they were refurbishing and they were going through all this stuff.
Like they up and decided to just leave.
And for a while, Deborah, there was some thought that maybe they had gone to Mexico, and there's a good reason for that. Somehow, the family's Isuzu Trooper, which they had with the car seat still in the back, was found right on the border at the San Ysidro crossing between California and Mexico. One of the busiest and most trafficked border terminals in the entire world. And the car's right there. Eventually it's towed because it was parked illegally in a shopping center right next to the border crossing. And then investigators who still haven't declared a crime start poring over this video, and they think, after like days and days, and with the help of Good Samaritans, they're poring over countless video feeds coming from the border terminal, and they believe that they spot this family of four that matches the description of the McStays crossing the border into Mexico. And when they finally get those search warrants, they're able to go in the family computer, and there is some traffic and internet traffic about, traveling to Mexico, staying there, and eventually there's even a waiter who thinks that he spots a child with a description of one of the kids, even with an identifying birthmark, and he calls law enforcement in the U.S., or law enforcement is called, and then San Diego sheriffs and others, and the FBI end up going to Mexico. They interview the waiter at the restaurant, but it turns out to be nothing.
Yeah.
And so years go by, and still there is no word about what happened to the McStays family. Obviously, This is a source of enormous distress to Joseph's mom, his dad, his brother. He was very close to them, but still there's no sign of anything.
And that was what was so confounding about this case. Matt, one of the things, and before we go further into the investigation, I'm just sort of curious because one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot is what it was like for us out in the field. And you're at this home where this family had recently moved into, and it's 15 years later. I mean, this happened in 2010, and it must have been sort of eerie for you, though. I mean, obviously you're reporting, but that must have been, when you know what happened, which is that this family disappeared, ultimately you know that they were not returned safely. Everything was left right there on the countertops. What was that like for you?
It's such a stereotypical California neighborhood, Deborah, right? Like, it is middle class, right next to avocado fields. When we flew the drone, you could see that, it's a really lovely place with lots of kids in the neighborhood. And even though it's all these individual houses, the McStays family home looked almost exactly like it did 15 years ago.
Wow, like frozen in time.
Exactly. And the families knew them. And the family across the street, they still have the camera that essentially captured a tiny bit of a vehicle leaving on February 4th, 2010, the day that they are believed to have disappeared, the last time that they were ever heard from.
One thing that I thought was interesting when you're talking with investigators, and there was a detail that we didn't get to put in our story, which is that a neighbor's security camera actually happened to malfunction. And these days we think about cameras being everywhere, right? They help police with these investigations. But before we hear more from you about that, let's listen to a bonus clip from your interview with Dennis Brugos of the San Diego Sheriff's Office.
This is the house where the neighbor had that camera.
Right.
that had the home surveillance footage.
And what that showed was a vehicle pulling out of the driveway sometime after 7 o'clock on the 4th of February, and then driving down the street. Unfortunately, the picture wasn't clear enough to where you can get any type of reading on the license plate.
And then, for some reason, between February 5th and February 15th, the homeowner says that her home surveillance camera malfunctions and she has no video. Mm-hmm. Is that significant for the investigation?
Well, yeah, certainly we would like to have as much video footage as we can, and that's one of the first things we do. We check for cameras in the area.
Investigators come here. There is no sign of struggle. There is no blood. There is no DNA. There are no eyewitnesses. The one surveillance camera that might exist goes blank on the days they might need it. It feels like this is a really tough start.
Well, it is. I mean, it was a tough case to start with. I mean, it never got much better.
What about that security camera, Matt? Because it sort of malfunctioned a little bit, but it did sort of come into play in this story.
One of the things, Deborah, that I noticed in the neighborhood is how closely people live, right? Everybody knows each other. And here you had the McStay family with 2 young children, 2 dogs in the yard. Like, they interacted with their neighbors. And today, everybody's got some sort of doorbell camera or security camera, right? Everyone. But we are talking about 15 years ago. The shocking fact is that it seemed to go out between the 5th and the 15th. These are critical days in the investigation. And one wonders what could have been captured, the comings and goings on those days. If someone had murdered the family at the house itself, would the video camera have captured it? Would it have seen more during the day? Would it have showed that person or people? Were there multiple people transporting the body or bodies or doing something? But the fact that the camera didn't work and that law enforcement didn't have any video footage from the 5th of February 2010 to the 15th of that month in 2010.
Well, Matt, ultimately, authorities arrest Joseph McStay's colleague in his business, Chase Merritt. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we want to hear about your reporting on basically this disturbing story that people are still talking about in California. So don't go away. Welcome back to the After Show. Before the break, we were talking with Matt Gutman about the report that he just brought to 2020, what happened to the McStays. Let's get back to the man who was ultimately convicted in this case, Chase Merritt. And prosecutors allege that he had been writing checks from the business, and he owed McStay like more than $40,000. I mean, this is where they're getting to the motive, that there was cell phone evidence that led them to argue that he was familiar with the location where the bodies were found. That was how they built their case, and all the evidence that painted a picture of him as the likely suspect. Talk to us a little bit about Chase Merritt. He didn't testify, but we did ultimately hear from him in court after the fact.
It turned out that Chase Merritt, according to prosecutors, had a gambling problem. And then he needed money. And he was good at making these waterfalls. That was the business that he and Joseph McStay had. He was really good at producing this stuff. He wasn't so good at the business of it. So it turns out that he may have owed Joseph McStay over $40,000 in back payments. It also turned out that he ended up, once Joseph disappeared, cutting checks to himself. And those checks began essentially the moment that Joseph disappeared. And they went on for a number of days. And investigators found that very suspicious. Yeah. And then they built on the cell phones. And they learned that when it's believed that that the family was disappeared and buried in the desert at some point thereafter in the next couple of days, well, Chase Merritt's cell phone pings on a tower that is right literally a mile and a half or 2 miles away from the site. Chase Merritt said, "Hey, my sister lives on the other side of that cell phone tower. And, I'm very familiar with the area."
Ultimately, he was convicted in this case, and you actually had an opportunity to speak with him after the fact. I mean, he's in prison now. Not many people have had that opportunity. You spoke with him via phone. He continues to argue a very different story. Talk to us a little bit about that conversation.
Chase Merritt continues to profess his innocence. And remember, Deborah, this is a case that was decided solely on circumstantial evidence. There is not a speck of physical evidence that puts Chase Merritt either at the scene of the possible crime. Nobody knows yet where the McStay family was murdered, whether it happened in the house itself or if it happened in another place. That's how little physical evidence there is in this case. But it is all circumstantial. And he says, listen, it wasn't me. I wasn't there. They can't prove it. And he claims that there is evidence that the jury was not privy to from another cell phone expert who says Chase Merritt's cell phone could never have pinged near the side of the gravesite. The people who said that were wrong. They misinterpreted the data, and Chase Merritt could not have been there. He believes that that's exculpatory evidence that was not presented. His lawyer said the same thing, but the fact is his lawyer did have the opportunity to present this witness at trial, and he didn't do it.
Yeah.
He remains adamant that he did not commit this crime.
And he had argued how much he loved Joseph and he never would have done this. Well, Matt, when we come back, we want to talk about the behind-the-scenes moments. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Matt Gutman. Matt, this story, oftentimes, like these stories do, take you to different places. This one took you out to the Mojave Desert. What was that like?
And on the one hand, if you look in one direction, it feels like the most remote place on the planet, Deborah. On the other hand, you're looking at I-15 right behind you, despite the blistering heat. And that is like one of the main thoroughfares from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. So on the one hand, a mile from where we were, really traveled highway, and everything beyond it is just wilderness. But luckily, I was with these spectacular producers who I've been working with for over probably almost 12, 13 years, Alyssa and Sonny. And we got it all done. It was spectacular.
Yeah, they had your back. Well, it is important, though, for our audience to go to these places and to be able to, in the storytelling, to show everybody where these things happen. And you were right there. Basically, it was sort of the grave site not far from the highway, as you said, where the bodies were discovered. The McStays family left behind there. And it's so interesting because it's like so close to this highway, as you said, but not necessarily clearly visible to somebody who would be driving by.
So if you're driving on the highway, you would not have noticed us. But we, standing there in the desert, looking at the highway, saw every single car. You could even, see into the trucks, right? And I asked the investigator, how is it possible that nobody saw anything from the highway? He said, folks are cruising there at 75 miles an hour. They're not looking a mile off the side of the road, and they can't see with that kind of detail, even though we're looking at them. And then the other side, about a mile and a half away, was this dump where there are lots of trucks and cars, but they're also not looking out for it. And so there was this memorial set up for them informally, because the family of the McStays ended up, obviously the bodies were exhumed for forensics, but they were buried in a different place, which was actually their final resting place.
Yeah, well, Matt, it was just a remarkable story, and it's kind of a reminder to us, too, that, at the end of these stories, it's all about the loved ones, right? Those who are left behind, those who are trying to honor the people that they've lost, the victims of these crimes. And you and your team just did a really remarkable job of bringing to us this story of a mystery, but one that just really was so very captivating. So, Matt, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. I know it's a busy time for you. You probably got to go hit the road again.
Not for the next 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
Always good to chat with you, Deborah.
You too. Matt, great to see you.